Hello, my name is Paul Arnold, sometimes known as Stuttering Professor. I'm a strategic planner, facilitator and trainer, amongst other things. And as you can see, I've read quite a few books. And I've summarised over 50 business-related books. And today I want to talk about this, Carol Dweck's The Growth Mindset, changing the way you think to fulfill your potential. Now, the one-liner I give for this book is, you need to develop a growth mindset where we focus on effort to achieve our goals rather than believing in innate talent. And again, it's this idea about a mindset is a belief system, it's an attitude we have about ourselves, our relation to the world we live in, and basically that therefore sets us up about how we interact with the world and how we behave in that world, and the sense making that we make in that space. It also affects our emotions, and ultimately what she's suggesting affects our success. Now, there are in the book she talks about there being two fundamental types of people, which are, you've either got a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. Now, the growth mindset believes change and personal growth can happen if they work hard at it. And they see challenges and failure as part of the normal curve that we learn in. So they're basically less held back by things going wrong. Conversely, the fixed mindset believe we are who we are. It's innate, it's fixed at birth, it's in our DNA. We are who we are. And obviously, parental pride overfills that space. Oh, you're a brilliant child, you're so clever, you're so good at drawing, you're such a natural dancer, la 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 la. And the reality is that these people then are often scared of being found out, because there's a sort of a disbelief going on in them, that they're not as talented as people think they are, and therefore they fear failure so much more. And therefore, because of that, they can very easily give up on tasks. And as I just hinted at, mindsets get formed early on in our lives by our parents praising how clever we are, and all that leads to a fixed mindset. Whilst instead, rather than praising talent and innateness, we really ought to be sort of praising how hard they worked. You've worked really hard on that drawing, darling. It looks really lovely. Well done for working so hard. And I appreciate it was a bit difficult for you, but really well done. That's the sort of stuff we should be doing on. Now, the good news is that basically mindsets can be shifted, and we'll come on to that a little bit later on. So let's dig a little bit more into the book. Look, Dweck debunks that talent alone determines success. And whilst natural ability is helpful, long-term success is much more strongly linked to persistence, resilience, being able to learn and grow, as so many other books have talked about, the 10,000 hours we've all heard about. And one of the bits of research that is quoted in the book is studies of high-achieving individuals show that what distinguishes them is not raw talent, but their willingness to work hard, learn from failures, and push themselves. So let's dig a little bit more into these two mindsets. So as I said, the fixed mindset. The fixed mindset are people who think that that's how they are built, that's how they cook, this is the way which they are. And therefore, because of that, they've got this innate sense of maybe I'm not as good as I, and if I am not as good, therefore I must be a weaker human being. And therefore they're going to avoid challenges that might expose their perceived lack of ability. They focus on looking smart rather than on learning. And they can have an air of entitlement and superiority about them and see themselves as being more talented than others. And they can also be closed and react badly to criticism, as often a strategy to prevent future criticism by firing back. And they often hide behind blame or excuses. They can be envious and competitive versus others and take losing quite badly. and they easily give up or do not push themselves as hard as they could, as they assume that, with this innate talent, they don't need to. Now, it's interesting, when I was reading all this stuff, I thought, hold on a minute, I've just done a whole load of things about narcissism. This feels to be very closely linked. And sure enough, there is evidence to suggest the fixed mindset is closely linked to narcissistic tendencies. Now, the growth mindset, which in the book is set up as the big hero thing, the thing we should all have. So basically, in growth mindset, it's all about the people. They're going to embrace challenges, they're going to persist through obstacles, they're going to learn from criticism and inspired by others' success. And they're humble, open, curious, and work hard. And clearly they see the goal to be it's the trip along the way, not just the destination. And they're on a learning curve, and they're growing and not just aiming to reach some fixed goal, some prize or accolade. And as I said, these tendencies start out very early on in life and shaped, by the way, with what adults and key care to praise or criticise about them as kids. So praising innate talent, you're naturally good at this, is going to lead to a growth mindset, versus talking about their effort is going to lead more to a growth one. Dweck points out that we need to distance behaviour from outcomes, from who we really are, because the key point in the book is that behaviour is not identity. And just because you didn't do particularly well on something, it doesn't mean that you're not very good as a human being. And so consequently, we've got to make sure that we focus on effort rather than literal attainment, so we don't drive people into a place of feeling incompetent. In the book, it's broken down a number of different chapters. So, it talks about how it affects education, sport, business, relationships, So let's look at the first about academic. It plays a crucial role in academic achievement, and certainly students with a growth mindset outperform those with a fixed mindset because they keep on going. When they've got a difficult maths thing, they will push on through even though it's difficult, whilst the fixed mindset are more likely to give up. In sports, a growth mindset leads to better performance and longer term success, because no one in the athletic world wins first time, and you've got to believe that you've got to put the effort in and the training in, and you've got to persist, and you've got to learn from your losses and growth. And in the book it talks about Tiger Woods, his growth mindset and how he was raised by his father, and was this idea about constantly being able to learn and grow, was all about it. And counter to that, talk about John McEnroe, who hid behind blame and external excuses when he underperformed. So really believes we learn this from the way our parents have treated us. So, as I said, Tiger Woods had a very supportive, open-minded dad, whilst McEnroe's dad was very critical. And obviously when you criticise a fixed mindset person, it's often taken to be a deep, unchanging flaw. So you are criticising me at an identity level rather than at a belief level. Now, into business, an organisation, she suggests, can also have a fixed or growth mindset culture. And if you've got a fixed mindset person who's leading the organisation or leading a team, we can often get the same stuff come through. They're going to avoid admitting mistakes. They're going to focus on looking competent. They're going to undermine others who threaten their self-image. And obviously all this leads to a toxic work environment, and is going to sort of create stagnation and affect performance. Whilst the growth mindset leader is going to foster innovation, foster collaboration, and is going to be better at so many other things like negotiation skills. They're going to encourage feedback, they're going to reward learning, and they're going to invest in their employees' growth. And the examples quoted in the book is that John Welsh from GE and Lou Gerstner from IBM versus Lee Cocker, who had a fixed mindset. Mindset in relationships clearly, plays a massive role, in conflict or disagreement is seen as a sign of a poor relationship. Often see the other person as being irrevocably flawed, highly critical, blaming them, and so give up on the relationship when the relationship fails. And when it falls back upon them, they see themselves as being deeply flawed. Versus a growth mindset in a relationship realizes that we're all trying to grow, we're all trying to learn, and therefore there's a mutual respect for the other person, helping them to grow and them helping you to go and grow. So therefore conflicts are resolved much more constructively. You're trying to find a way through this and not, and keeping things at the behavior level rather than at the identity level. And this idea that, that there's mindsets in parenting, teaching and coaching. So the big message is like, do praise effort, do praise their progress. Don't label children as smart or gifted, or the other end of being the other side of not being that way either. And then encourage them to take on challenges and not see mistakes as part of a problem with them, but it's all part of the way in which they learn. And parents and teachers, we become role models of that stuff, and therefore we've got to be careful that we are acting in a way which suggests to them, how they should be themselves. She then comments at the back end of the book about, how we should, help build a fixed, how to move from a fixed mindset to a more open growth mindset place. So the first thing, hear the fixed mindset internal voice, challenge it, recognize you do have choice, look at the sort of what you're saying about it, what's the sort of meaning you'll put up on that voice, and you've got to talk back to that fixed mindset voice and say, I can learn with practice, and then you've got to accept that, all this stuff is going to take over time, and maybe there's some areas you're not and some areas that you are. Critique of the book, I have a very personal thing about, I don't like things being so binary, so one or the other, and I think we are probably a mix of all these things. And the other thing, there's something about, this is there's some very good stuff, but compared to all the real psychotherapy books I've got there, it's still this popularization of psychology and oversimplification that sort of gets in the way with me. The book is repetitive with maybe too many anecdotes, and it was probably one of the smallest typeface I've read. You need to write to read it with a light or with glasses on, and the other thing is it falls into the common trap that one theory must fit all situations in life, so I therefore sometimes think, life isn't quite as simple as that, So overall, look, I think the book has some fantastic principles in it. Would I recommend you read the book? No, there are some great videos online which can give you the core essence of what it's about. And maybe this is one of them.